Everything you were taught about methane is wrong. The United States government classified the biogas produced by a single dairy goat as a regulated emission in 2009, placing it in the same bureaucratic category as runoff from a 5,000-head feedlot. And in doing so, they made it nearly impossible for a small homesteader to legally harness the single most efficient closed-loop energy and protein system that has ever existed on a family farm. One goat, fed on weeds and kitchen scraps you would otherwise throw away, produces enough methane every single day to run a cooking burner for 2 full hours and enough high-protein milk to replace the grocery store entirely for a household of 4. That is not an exaggeration. That is measured, documented output from a system that worked on 3 continents for over 4,000 years before anyone with a lobbyist decided it was dangerous. So, why did they call it a biohazard? Why did an animal that can convert brushland into fuel and complete nutrition get reclassified alongside industrial polluters? And who profits every single day that you do not know how to build the simple digester that turns goat waste into free cooking gas? By the time you finish watching this, you will never look at that patch of scrub brush behind your house the same way again. You will see fuel, you will see protein, and you will understand exactly why no one in an official capacity ever told you this was possible. The integrated goat biogas system is not new. It is ancient. The earliest documented evidence comes from Assyrian records dating to approximately the 10th century BC, where palace text describes sealed clay vessels collecting gas from animal dung to heat bathwater for royalty. But the civilization that perfected the small-scale household version, the one that matters to you and me, was Imperial China during the Han Dynasty, roughly 200 years before the birth of Christ. Han farmers kept small herds of goats not primarily for meat, but for a triple output they understood intimately: milk for protein, dung for fuel gas, and the leftover digestate slurry for fertilizing rice paddies. They built underground stone chambers sealed with clay and fed them daily with goat manure mixed with water and vegetable scraps. The gas that rose was captured under an inverted clay dome and piped through hollow bamboo directly into cooking hearths. This was not primitive. This was engineering. A single-family unit with 4 to 6 goats could produce all of its cooking fuel and a significant percentage of its protein needs without purchasing anything from outside the household. That system survived unbroken in rural China for over 2,000 years. In the Indian subcontinent, the same principle appeared independently. By the 17th century, Mughal-era farmers in what is now Rajasthan were running household biogas units on goat dung, and the British colonial administration documented these systems extensively in the 1880s because they worked so well that the villages using them had no need to purchase British coal or kerosene. That detail matters. When a colonizer documents your technology, they are not admiring it. They are identifying a threat to their market. The suppression in the American context began in earnest after World War II. The petrochemical industry had massive surplus capacity after wartime production ended, and propane, butane, and natural gas needed new domestic markets. The American Farm Bureau Federation, working closely with petrochemical sponsors, began promoting gas-powered appliances for rural homes through extension services funded jointly by industry and the USDA. Between 1947 and 1955, the number of American farms using propane for cooking increased by over 300%. During that exact same period, references to on-farm biogas production in USDA extension publications dropped from 14 mentions in 1946 to 0 mentions by 1953. That is not a coincidence. That is a market being built on the deliberate burial of a competing technology that cost the farmer nothing. The industry that replaced your ancestors' free fuel is now worth approximately $31 billion annually in the United States alone. Every dollar of that is money extracted from people who could have been producing their own energy from an animal that also fed their family. Now, let me explain why this works, because understanding the mechanism is the difference between believing me and knowing for yourself. A goat is a ruminant, meaning it has a specialized digestive system built around a large fermentation chamber called the rumen. Inside that rumen, billions of anaerobic bacteria break down cellulose, the tough structural fiber in plants that humans cannot digest. and convert it into volatile fatty acids that the goat absorbs as energy. This is why a goat can eat brush, bark, woody stems, and weeds that would pass through your body without yielding a single calorie. The goat is not just eating, it is running a biological refinery. What comes out the other end, the manure, is not waste in any meaningful sense. It is a partially processed organic material still rich in carbon and nitrogen compounds. And it is absolutely teeming with the exact anaerobic bacteria needed to produce methane. When you place that manure into a sealed container, called a digester, and add water to create a slurry with roughly 8 to 12% solids, those bacteria continue working. Without oxygen, they break down the remaining organic matter in a process called anaerobic digestion, and the primary byproduct is biogas, a mixture of approximately 60 to 65% methane and 35 to 40% carbon dioxide, with trace amounts of hydrogen sulfide. That ratio matters to you because 60% methane is more than enough to sustain a clean burning flame for cooking. Natural gas from your utility company is roughly 90% methane. So biogas burns at a slightly lower heat, but a simple adjustment to your burner's air intake compensates for this completely. You do not need purification equipment. You do not need compressors. You need a sealed container, a pipe, and a goat. Here is the number that changes everything. A single adult dairy goat producing 4 pounds of manure per day generates enough biogas in a properly sized digester to yield approximately 12 to 15 cubic feet of gas every 24 hours. 12 cubic feet of biogas at 60% methane concentration contains roughly 7,200 BTUs of usable energy. A standard kitchen burner uses about 8,000 BTUs per hour. That means one goat's daily output gives you nearly a full hour of cooking heat per day. And if you have 3 goats, which is a small, manageable herd on even a quarter acre with rotational browsing, you have enough gas for all your cooking and enough left over to run a gas-powered lamp in the evening. 3 goats, no electric bill for cooking, no propane delivery, no dependency. But the energy side is only half the equation. A Nigerian dwarf dairy goat, one of the most efficient small breeds for homesteading, produces between 1 and 3 quarts of milk per day, depending on genetics and feed quality. That milk contains approximately 6.1% butterfat and 4.4% protein, which is significantly richer than standard cow milk at 3.5% fat and 3.2% protein. From 3 does in staggered lactation cycles, a homesteader can expect roughly 2 to 3 quarts of milk daily averaged across the year. That milk makes cheese, yogurt, butter, and kefir. The whey left over from cheese making is a high-quality protein supplement that can be fed back to chickens or pigs, creating yet another closed loop. You are not just keeping an animal. You are operating a biological system that converts sunlight into food and fuel through a chain of living processors, each one feeding the next. So if all of this works, and it demonstrably does, why are you only hearing about it now on a channel like this instead of from your county extension agent? Follow the money. The American propane industry delivers approximately 7.5 billion gallons of propane per year to residential customers, generating roughly $15 billion in annual revenue. The average rural household spends between $800 and $1,400 per year on propane for cooking and heating, depending on climate zone. A functioning 3-goat biogas system eliminates or dramatically reduces that expense. It also eliminates the monthly dependency on a delivery truck, which means it eliminates a recurring revenue stream for an industry that has spent decades making sure you believe there is no alternative. The regulatory angle is where this turns from economic history into something that should concern you personally. In 2009, the EPA expanded its interpretation of the Clean Air Act's regulations on methane sources to include small-scale anaerobic digesters under certain state-level permitting requirements. The stated reason was environmental protection. The practical effect was that building a backyard biogas digester in at least 17 states now requires permits, inspections, or compliance documentation that costs more than the digester itself. In 3 states, the regulations are written so broadly that even composting goat manure in a sealed container could theoretically trigger reporting requirements. Who wrote those regulations? The comment period records are public. The largest number of industry comments came from propane distributors, natural gas utilities, and the American Petroleum Institute. They did not argue that biogas was dangerous. They argued that unregulated biogas production represented, and I am quoting from a 2008 comment letter, an uncontrolled combustion risk to residential structures. They used the word biohazard, not in reference to disease, but in reference to the flammability of methane, a gas they themselves pipe directly into millions of homes every day through infrastructure they control. The distinction is everything. Methane is safe when they sell it to you. Methane is a biohazard when your goat makes it for free. The dairy industry has its own reasons for keeping you away from goats. American consumers spend approximately $64 billion per year on dairy products. The dairy lobby, through organizations like the National Milk Producers Federation, has spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars ensuring that federal dietary guidelines recommend 3 cups of dairy per day, a recommendation that conveniently aligns with the output of large-scale Holstein operations, but bears no relation to what a family actually needs from a nutritional standpoint. A small herd of Nigerian dwarf goats producing 2 quarts of richer, more digestible milk daily provides more than enough protein and fat for a family while costing almost nothing to feed if managed on browse and kitchen waste. Every family that figures this out is a family that stops buying milk, cheese, and yogurt from the industrial supply chain. Your grocery bill drops, their revenue drops. The math is not complicated, but you do not have to take my word for any of this. The proof is walking around in communities that never abandon these systems, and their results speak louder than any argument I can make. In the hill regions of Nepal, particularly the districts surrounding Gorkha and Lumjung, household biogas digesters fed primarily by goat and buffalo dung have been in continuous operation since a United Nations pilot program installed the first modern units in 1955. Today, over 400,000 Nepali households run entirely on biogas for cooking and lighting. Studies conducted by the Biogas Support Program documented that families using these systems spend 73% less on fuel annually, that women and children in these households suffer dramatically lower rates of respiratory illness because they are no longer breathing wood smoke, and that the digestate slurry applied to fields increased rice yields by an average of 19% compared to fields using chemical fertilizer alone. 19%. From material that would otherwise sit in a pile and attract flies. Closer to home, the Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, have kept dairy goats as integrated homestead animals for generations. While the Amish do not typically build biogas digesters due to their specific community traditions around technology, their goat management practices demonstrate the protein side of the equation conclusively. Amish families running small herds of 6 to 10 dairy goats report annual cheese production of between 80 and 120 pounds per household, enough to eliminate dairy purchases entirely and produce surplus for community trade. Their feed costs are minimal because goats browse on land margins, hedgerows, and woodlot understory that would otherwise require mechanical clearing. The goats are not competing with crops for land. They are harvesting calories from land that produces nothing else. In South Korea, a modern example drives the point even further. The rural cooperative movement in Chungcheongnam-do province has operated combined goat dairy and biogas facilities since the early 1990s. These are not large industrial operations. They are family-scale units, typically 4 to 8 goats, with simple fixed-dome digesters made from locally produced cement. A 2016 study by the Korean Rural Economic Institute found that participating families had average energy independence rates of 61%, meaning they generated nearly 2/3 of their household energy from biogas alone. And their per capita protein intake from home-produced goat dairy exceeded the national average, despite spending less than 1/5 the national average on food. These are not hypothetical projections. These are measured outcomes from families doing exactly what I am about to describe to you. Here is how you build this system, and I want you to understand that the materials involved are simple, the skills required are basic, and the most expensive component is the goats themselves. Start with the animals. 2 to 3 Nigerian dwarf does in staggered breeding cycles will give you year-round milk production with manageable daily labor. Nigerian dwarfs are the ideal breed for this system because they are small enough to house in a space as compact as a 10 by 12 foot shelter with attached browse yard. They are hardy in climates from Maine to Texas, and their milk is the richest of any standard dairy breed relative to body size. You can find registered Nigerian dwarf does from reputable breeders for between $200 and $400 each. Buy them already bred if possible, so your first milk comes within months rather than a full breeding cycle out. House them simply. Goats need dry shelter, not heated shelter. A 3-sided shed with a sloped roof facing away from prevailing wind, bedded with straw or waste hay, is sufficient in all but the most extreme northern climates. Your browse yard should be fenced with 4-foot woven wire, which is enough for Nigerians, and it should include access to brushy areas, weed patches, and any scrub vegetation you have been meaning to clear anyway. The goats will clear it for you and convert it into milk and manure while they work. Feed supplementation during winter or low browse periods consists of grass hay and a small ration of mixed grains, which can be purchased from a local feed mill for roughly $12 to $15 per goat per month during the months when browse is unavailable. Now for the digester. You are building what is called a fixed dome continuous feed anaerobic digester, and despite the technical name, the construction is straightforward. You need a primary digestion chamber, which is simply a sealed container with a volume of approximately 60 to 80 gallons for a 3-goat operation. The most accessible option is a 55-gallon polyethylene drum, the kind you can find at any farm supply store or often for free from food processing businesses that discard them. You will actually want 2 drums plumbed together in series for a 3-goat system, giving you a total working volume of around 110 gallons. Each drum gets a sealed lid with 2 fittings, 1 inlet pipe for feeding the slurry in, and 1 outlet pipe at the top for gas collection. The inlet is a 2-inch PVC pipe entering through the lid at an angle, extending down into the drum so that fresh slurry enters below the liquid surface level. This prevents gas from escaping backward through the inlet. The gas outlet is a 1/2-inch barbed fitting at the highest point of the lid, connected to flexible tubing that runs to your collection and use point. Between the digester and your burner, you need one simple component, a water trap made from a jar half filled with water through which the gas line passes. This removes the trace hydrogen sulfide, which is the compound that smells like rotten eggs, and it also acts as a pressure relief so your digester never builds dangerous pressure. The total material cost for the digester, plumbing, and gas line is between $40 and $70 depending on what you already have on hand. Each day, you collect the goat manure from the shelter, mix it with water at a ratio of approximately 1 part manure to 1 part water by volume until you have a pourable slurry, and pour it into the digester through the inlet pipe. In a properly functioning digester, you will see the first gas production within 7 to 14 days of initial loading, depending on ambient temperature. The system works fastest at temperatures between 77 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which means in summer you may see strong gas flow within a week, while in winter you may need to insulate the drums with straw bales or locate them in a south-facing area to maintain adequate warmth. You will know the system is producing when you see bubbles forming in your water trap. At full production, typically reached about 30 days after initial loading, you can expect a steady gas output sufficient to run a single burner for 1.5 to 3 hours per day from a 3-goat system. The most common failure point is a pH imbalance in the digester. If you feed too much fresh manure too quickly, without allowing the bacterial colony to establish, the system turns acidic and gas production stalls. You will notice this because the slurry will develop a sharp, vinegar-like smell instead of the mild, earthy odor of a healthy digester. The fix is simple. Stop feeding for 3 to 5 days, add a tablespoon of baking soda dissolved in warm water, and let the bacteria rebalance. After a few days, the system will resume. This is the mistake nearly everyone makes in the first month, and it is the reason many people incorrectly conclude that small-scale digesters do not work. They work. You just have to let the biology establish before you push the volume. By the end of your first full season, here is what your 3-goat system looks like. You have 2 to 3 quarts of milk per day, which you are turning into soft cheese, hard cheese, yogurt, and drinking milk. You have eliminated or nearly eliminated your dairy purchases. You have enough cooking gas to prepare at least 1 full meal per day without propane, electricity, or any external fuel source. You have a steady supply of digestate slurry, which is a superior garden fertilizer with a nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium profile of roughly 1.5 to 1.0 to 0.5, perfectly balanced for most vegetable crops and available in unlimited quantity at no cost. And you have cleared a significant area of brushy waste ground simply by letting the goats do what they evolved to do. What most people do not realize is that this 3-goat biogas system is not an endpoint. It is a starting gate. The same anaerobic digestion process that works with goat manure works even better when you co-digest multiple organic inputs. Adding chicken manure to your goat slurry increases methane yield by approximately 25% because poultry waste has a higher nitrogen content, which accelerates bacterial metabolism. A homestead with 3 goats and a dozen laying hens feeding a shared digester produces enough gas for 2 to 3 hours of cooking per day, plus surplus for a gas-powered refrigerator conversion, which is a modification that uses a standard propane refrigerator with no alterations because biogas burns on the same burners propane does. The digestate output from a co-digestion system with goats and chickens is a nearly perfect garden fertilizer that replaces every bag of synthetic fertilizer you would otherwise buy. If you add a small worm composting bin to process the solid digestate fraction, you create vermicompost that retails commercially for over $400 per cubic yard. You will never need to buy soil amendments again, and you will have surplus to offer neighbors or sell at a local market. The rabbit fits into this system as well. Rabbit manure is one of the few animal manures that can be applied directly to gardens without composting because its nutrient profile is mild enough not to burn plants. But fed into a digester, rabbit manure produces gas efficiently because of its low moisture content and high fiber fraction. A homesteader adding 4 to 6 rabbits to a goat and chicken system creates a triple protein source: milk, eggs, and meat, all feeding a single digester that powers the kitchen. This is not a fantasy. This is a system design that has been documented in working form on small holdings across Southeast Asia, East Africa, and Central America for decades. The only place it is considered unusual is in the one country whose energy industry spent the most money making sure it would be. The water cycle closes the last gap. Goats need roughly 1 gallon of clean water per day per animal. The liquid effluent that exits your digester after the gas has been extracted is rich in dissolved nutrients but biologically stable, meaning the anaerobic process has broken down pathogens and weed seeds. This effluent can be diluted and applied directly to fruit trees, perennial beds, and pasture. In regions where water is limited, the digester becomes a water recycling system. You use water to create slurry. The bacteria process it, and the nutrient-rich water returns to your land to grow the browse your goats will eat next season. The circle closes. Nothing leaves. Nothing is purchased. The sun grows the brush, the goats eat the brush, the manure feeds the digester, the gas cooks your food, the effluent feeds the soil, and the soil grows more brush. Every link in that chain was understood by farmers 5 centuries ago. Every link was broken by an industry that needed you to buy what you could make yourself. I want you to think about something. Your grandparents or their grandparents did not think of self-sufficiency as a lifestyle choice. They did not call it homesteading and watch videos about it. It was just life. They kept animals that served multiple purposes because an animal that only did one thing was a luxury they could not afford. Somewhere along the way, that practical intelligence was rebranded as primitive. The people selling you propane and pasteurized milk needed you to believe that progress meant dependency, that a modern household buys its energy and its food rather than producing it, that the complexity of biology should be left to corporations with laboratories and government agencies with acronyms. They needed you to forget that a goat standing in your yard is a power plant and a dairy and a land clearing crew and a fertilizer factory, all wrapped in an animal that weighs less than a large dog and can be kept on a space smaller than a parking spot. You now know what they buried. You know why they buried it. And you know how to dig it up. What you do with that knowledge is between you and your land. But I will tell you this. Every day that system is not running on your property is a day you are paying someone else for something your ground already provides. The choice was never really about goats or gas or milk. It was about whether you produce your life or purchase it. That is the only question that has ever mattered. And now you have the answer.